Welcome to another episode of the Ecom Ops podcast. What can you ship? What can you not ship? What are the difficulties? Why is it difficult? This is basically what we're going to cover in this episode. Welcome to the Ecom Ops podcast. Dayu and myself is going to help you uncovering the supply chain when you ship small parcels from China. Thank you, Dayu, for another episode. This is going to be interesting because we've seen so many different types of products being shipped out of China. Some succeed, some don't succeed. They have issues when scaling, and everything starts with the perfect product, at least what they have in their mind. But there are definitely limitations, I would say, on what is not possible to ship or better not to ship.
Yes, definitely, Simon. I mean, I think this is a very, very important topic because as we advise all of our clients is as you're thinking about your product development or we're launching a new product, there is obviously the important aspect of is there demand? Is this the right product? Is this the right product customization? However, one aspect that everyone really should consider, whether shipping from China or not, is just generally logistics because different logistics considerations, limitations, and how that might impact how you might even package it, how you might think about the box of the product can actually have very significant cost implications, very often on the negative side. So at the start, as you're thinking about your product and how you package it and your overall product roadmap, please include logistics, whether it's freight or direct parcel shipping, in that consideration as well to really make sure that your product is setting up for success or at least not set up for failure just because of logistics limitations or unexpected costs.
Quite often it starts with, okay, what's the product that a client, potential client wants to ship? Then you said, please send a sample, because then we can actually verify whether that product is suitable to be shipped in the first place.
Mhm.
But there's also a lot of difficulties in itself, like what we face. Some products are, it's possible to ship, but it might not be suitable to ship, if that makes sense. So they have, for example, an existing agent or company that's helping them to ship out of China, and they can make it work. And then it's like we go and say we would not recommend you to ship or send this product in the first place. So how does this? How can people better understand this conflict? Basically, one saying yes, the other saying no. What's behind that?
Well, so as you alluded to as well, there is two separate considerations: the product itself and how it's actually packaged, and what are those implications. And very often we see this kind of issue in either of those, right? So maybe let's talk about the somewhat more straightforward first is the product packaging itself. And one common problem that I often see, and it's not an inherent problem in itself, is that when you think about traditional retail, traditional product planning, well, actually, traditional retail is the key word here. 10 years ago, before the rise of D2C e commerce, everything was more optimized for retail display. And everything is more optimized for getting it to that retailer. So I used to work in the toy industry, and Simon, you have kids, so you probably understand this. If you go to your local toy store, everything is packaged so that it is attractive for the child, right? So this is where you see like blister packs where sometimes odd shapes to kind of showcase the action figure, for example, right? And when they think about shipping on a container, they also think about like, okay, how many can you fit as much as possible in a container. Now, when you put stuff in a container, everything is in a carton and then in a pallet. So that in itself actually protects the product extremely well. I mean, especially if you're putting a container on the sea, right? A sea freight is relatively stable, right? It doesn't move around and jostle around a lot, right? So actually, toy display is the perfect example of something like this. And we were actually working with clients who actually are then selling these kind of toys from China. And then they send us a sample, and it is a very simple but very attractive pack that kind of showcases the action figure itself. And then we're like, wait a minute. Like, if you're going to put this in a parcel, whether actually it's shipping from China or even local shipping, we're like, look, these edges are going to break. You're going to need some kind of like box around this in order for it to actually arrive in a perfect enough condition so it doesn't ruin the unboxing effect, right? So, that is actually one specific example of why, if you're going to ship parcels from China, you do actually have to consider how do you actually ship it on a partial basis, right? And I mean, if we use something like that, I mean, it doesn't have to be a toy, right? Simon, you probably know best as well. What is like the rough cost implication of having to add another hard box around a package, around a product, just to be able to ship it?
Yeah. So normally adding a box is like, depending on the size of the box, obviously, 20 to $50 cents. And then it includes also, there's going to be additional weight, normally 200 grams, 300 grams extra, which then increases the shipping cost, which is basically unnecessary extra cost for the box itself and for the shipping cost, and therefore not ideal. And I think that the reason also, a very good point from your side, is when we receive a sample, what we quite often do is we just drop it on the ground and see what happens. Because it's not on a pallet on sea freight where it's protected with all the corners. We put it in a bag, and mostly postal bag. Then there's going to be pressure. Let's say it's in the bottom, there's going to be pressure. These postal bags are then put on a conveyor belt. These conveyor belts, they go round and round, and then they fall off a shaft into another postal bag where there's going to be a fall movement, and they might be in the bottom again, or maybe in the top. But these bags are then thrown into a bigger size container or pallet or whatever it is, which also causes pressure. And then they arrive in the destination, and these bags need to be opened, and these parcels need to be sorted again one by one, and then they go into the last mile. So there are several occasions where the product can get damaged along the way because it's not well protected. And the consumer experience is, of course, everything. How does it arrive? If your parcel is being all scrambled, obviously the product is fine, but the experience is not fine. And I think that's something that then adding a more stronger carton box it helps significantly. Not per se on just product packaging, just improve the product packaging and make it more optimal for shipping from China. There was another case with a client which has basically had a very nice box, but 50% of the product was air. So basically putting pressure on it, obviously it will shrink, but it will also said, if you actually reduce the air, you can make it flatter, it can go into the mailbox directly. Therefore, you have a 100% delivery rate because it will go through the mailbox instead of someone having to ring in the doorbell, someone opening the door, handing it over. Maybe they're not home, has to go back, another delivery attempt, or maybe a pickup location. So packaging is not only for protecting the product, but it could also be actually reducing the cost, because every non-delivered item and not first time right is extra cost.
That's actually a great point, and it depends on your product category and your customers' expectations for that category as well. So let's take an extreme example of Apple products. Apple products, they have a great unboxing experience. They have very hard premium boxes, which, by the way, don't cost even that much for what it is, right? Especially for the amount of money that Apple charges you for each product. One thing you'll notice, though, is that they're always extremely compact. An iPhone comes in quite a compact box, and it's very hard and relatively light and relatively small for what it is. That's obviously part of their brand as well. However, that is to be able to protect it no matter what. And if you think about Apple, actually, like their retail display is that they literally just display the phone. So like they don't even need to think about that box being a retail display. So it's very smart on them, right? And then that is so optimal for shipping really anywhere for anything, right? That being said, compared to $1,000 iPhone, a couple dollars spent on the box is not that much. We've had situations before when, for example, a client would sell something soft, like, for example, a makeup bag, right? That is not hard. It's not like a case. It doesn't actually need that much protection. And they came to us and like, oh, we want this to be a premium brand. So we want the Apple type of unboxing experience. Then they realize, okay, an Apple type box, okay, it's probably a little bit too expensive for what they're selling, like $50 or so, right? So they're like, okay, let's come in the middle. We still want a nice box, but we don't want it that hard. And then I'm like, wait a minute. Well, if you have a box that's not hard and your product itself is soft, it's just gonna get smashed in shipment, right? And then I was like, wait, this beauty bag literally can be collapsed into like a much smaller package. Why do you need a box for this that's going to get damaged anyways and actually be negative to your unboxing experience? And no way should you get an Apple box for something like this. Why don't you consider something like a really nice pouch that then maybe the customer can use again for some other purposes? You could put your brand on it and they're like, oh, that's a great idea. And even something like that, starting from the original, what is the product packaging? A nice satin looking bag. It's actually cheaper in some cases than a box. It's cheaper to ship. And it actually creates a probably even better unboxing experience, unbagging experience for that specific customer rather than some kind of in between cardboard box. So, I mean, there is a lot of nuance on into this, and there's probably infinite possibilities depending on the product. But I think the main insight here is consider your packaging as part of your overall strategy, what you want to do with it, and make sure that you also have communications with your fulfillment center to make sure that there aren't any concerns around shippability.
I want to go briefly into like products what actually don't make sense, and some are very obvious. So, but I do want to mention it because there's more nuance to it, which you can definitely fill in more details with your recent experience. So let's take, for example, flammable. Like, what are flammable products? Aerosols, lighters, perfume, powder. Even milk powder is considered as a flammable, which is something I learned like when I was doing milk powder trading. Compressed gas, obviously these have flammable components in it, but there's also considered dangerous goods. Actually, everything you put in your suitcase that you cannot check in your check-in luggage is considered a dangerous goods. That also applies to small parcels. So that means knives, power banks, batteries, nail polish, weapons, obviously, but also flashlights, which is also a product that actually some flashlights, especially professional ones, you can kill someone with it, and therefore it becomes a dangerous goods. But then you have these prohibited goods that there's still nuance. Obviously, there's live animals you cannot do, and plants, magnets. They're products with a magnet inside. So magnets is still a tricky product because it can disturb some things within the process. Counterfeits, obviously, but medicine, obviously. But how about supplements? When is it the supplement? Does it have to be a pill? Can it be a powder supplement? Can it be a liquid supplement? And then you go into a fine line. And I think the recent experience that you had, Dayu, as well with cosmetics. Like, where is this fine line, and how do you determine it? Because even with a lighter, I would say obviously a lighter, but how about an electronic lighter? Yeah, well, also a no. Yeah, but one agent can do it and one cannot. So there is more nuance to all of these, but obviously the clear ones everyone has no doubt about. But power banks, e-lighters, cosmetics, supplements, these are still a little bit gray area, I would say.
Yeah, so let's talk about all those categories one by one. Let's maybe start with stuff that is definitely not shippable, at least through our normal parcel services. Flammable items. Flammable items include, I mean, just everything that's obviously flammable, lighter fluid, for example, right? And also separate batteries. I think that, well, there's the obviously flammable, and we'll talk about batteries second. No matter how much we or any courier wants to ship them, there is a very serious consideration of safety for the pilot on air. The only reason why China fulfillment works is because you have to utilize air, right? Whether it's a cargo flight, so but you still have pilots on board, or in many cases, actually passenger airlines also carry cargo as well. So it is literally irresponsible and unsafe for anyone to be sending anything that could actually produce any kind of non-zero risk for the pilots or crew or the passenger on board. So I vehemently, like, really am very adamant that you should not be shipping those. Now, I will tell you that you can't, because the way that logistics works is that they're not literally checking every single package. They're going to do spot checks. They're going to see things that come up in x-rays. You're going to have some 3PLs who are going to tell you, hey, we're going to try to mix it in other stuff and it'll probably go through, and we'll guarantee you we'll just resend it if it doesn't go through. That is irresponsible, okay? You do not want to put anyone's lives at risk, and even at the small risk, it happens. Like we hear sometimes about fires on planes because someone left a laptop battery in the cargo hold. right? Actually, even sometimes you left a phone and there was something faulty around and it caused a fire in the cargo hold. So there is a layer of responsibility that everyone should be aware of. Do not even try to ship something that is considered flammable. And this is not actually just China fulfillment, but even within local fulfillment, if you have a flammable good, they have to ship it via ground. They can't use air for it. Now, batteries is a special situation. So the way that batteries works, or power banks is a good example, or any kind of separate batteries, is when you have a battery without a closed circuit, that's what creates the potential fire risk. I don't know all the engineering behind it, but basically, if you have like a battery, like in a camera, for example, you can actually have that camera within your cargo hold because that forms a closed circuit, and there's not as much, or there is a very very low or almost zero risk of fire, right? So, but the nuance there is that you can still ship batteries. So you can ship products with batteries in them, and if you're going to, for example, sell a product and maybe have a battery upsell, as opposed to like, and this comes with even at the production level and packing level, right? As opposed to shipping the battery separate from the product in a package, just make sure that your manufacturer actually has the battery inside the package itself. And that not only removes that restriction, but again, it actually is safe to ship. Power banks, unfortunately, no matter what, you can't really ship them separately because that is probably one of the more extreme cases of a separate battery without a closed circuit. And we have situations of clients who want to upsell a power bank with a specific product, but probably the only way you can really do it is if you have a hybrid fulfillment model. For example, you have a US warehouse and a China warehouse, is that you ship the product itself from China, and then you can ship power banks from the US. And actually, you know what? Customers don't like it when they get multiple packages for the same order, but if you can explain to them why, if you just tell them, hey, this power bank has to ship separately because it has to ship in a different method because of fire risk, no one's going to complain as long as you set that expectation.
Yeah, I think it's very important to maybe add a little bit is this power bank. What I said is all these parcels, they fall on top of each other. There's physical movements. So that means products can be hit. If a battery is hit on a weak spot, it will ignite. There will be a fire risk, right? Therefore, that's an operational risk. But I've worked in the supply chain, talked with airlines, with last mile postal companies. We set up a dangerous goods line, a battery line in the past, which means there needs to be labels on the outside of the bags and the parcels to indicate this parcel is a dangerous good because it goes in a separate area in the plane where there are sprinklers, when where there are fire alarms and sprinklers in place to kill that fire if it ever happens. But also for when you inject it into the last mile, the people that are sorting the parcels, because sometimes there's also manual work coming into place, they have to wear gloves and face protection because there has been cases where a parcel exploded in their face. And this is not this is not a joke, but this is actually happening in real time, and that causes that there is a requirement for the safety of everyone on board of the plane, because a lot of these parcels are distributed by passenger flights, not always it's cargo. So a lot of passengers don't realize it, but in their flight that they're boarding with their suitcase, there are always parcels inside as well, especially when you're leaving China. And then there is this safety risk itself upon arrival for the handlers, the ones that are delivering the parcel, that are touching the parcel in the operations. There is a really strong reliability. And we see that the market is the bigger companies shipping out of China are getting bigger, the smaller are disappearing. These bigger companies also have ambitions to go global, maybe even stock listing or other things. They have to be compliant. It's no longer about, oh, we'll find, we just change the description, we just pretend it's not there, and we just figure it out as we go. It's not something that you can scale, you would recommend, but it's also just common sense. Why would you want to facilitate a potential hazard in a plane that you might be boarding on as well?
Yeah. Hey, loopholes exist, but don't build an entire business based on loopholes, okay? Because loopholes aren't going to exist at some point. Now, actually, let's talk about another category of definitely prohibited goods, and that's going to be supplements, and also just food and agricultural products in general. So the reason for those is that for food agricultural products is each country rightfully so, is very protective of their own ecological environment, right? So it is actually a very big risk to introduce some outside either fruits, animals, or whatnot into the environment and potentially damage the local ecology. So that is actually why one of the most strict areas of going through customs in airports is actually checking if you have like fresh produce. Same thing for shit. Like, don't use direct parcel shipment from China to get past that, because again, it's kind of irresponsible to the country itself, right? And customs are going to really care about that. So that's the reason that you should not be, or you cannot be shipping any food items or anything that be almost considered a fresh produce. The problem with direct parcel shipping also is that because of the way that it works, it's really impossible for them to have that much scrutiny on everything, which means that anything that looks like it could be prohibited in customs, they're going to deny it, right? Even if you say, oh, this is not really fresh produce, this is dried tea or whatever, right? They're going to be like, well, look, it looks close enough, so we're just going to deny it. Supplements or anything that is a medicine or anything that could be possibly considered a medicine, even if you put like salt in like, tablets, and it's like, hey, not really a medicine, right? All that stuff is really heavily controlled by, in the US, it's the FDA. In every single country, they have something similar. And again, it's a question of responsibility to the customer base, to the market. Is there's a reason why things need to get FDA approved or FDA regulated, because you don't want like just unsafe things to be going into your body, right? You don't want to be buying a bottle of some supplement and you have no idea what's in it and it's not regulated. And whatever it says, how do you even know like what's in there is actually what it says? And actually, especially if we're thinking about China, there's been certain situations where there was a whole baby powder scandal, for example, right? Where literally some things were sold that were not what it was and caused deaths, actually, or at least sicknesses. And again, going back to, there is no possible way that a parcel courier can actually evaluate the contents of a supplement. Like, it's not possible. They can't go in there, break up the cap, and like do some tests, like on just one parcel, right? And I think it's actually a right decision by them to say that, look, anything that even is close to looking like a supplement or a medicine, they just can't ship it. And if you are going to plan for something like that, and it's very common, by the way, to just work with a supplement provider, producer in the US, for example, that is FDA regulated, and then actually just scale up a business locally as opposed to internationally. And this is not just China, by the way. Like, if you try to ship supplements for the US to Europe, you're going to have the same problem as well. And you definitely shouldn't.
Then we've had these things not to ship, but like I said before, there are nuances to what is possible still to ship. And I think one of them is definitely regarding, I would say, beauty, cosmetics, because normally I would say everything, obviously, that's dangerous and flammable, but everything you put in your mouth normally is a no go. And what you put on your skin is sometimes okay, sometimes not okay, depends a little bit on how much milliliter is in there. So how does it exactly work? Because you have the hands-on experience recently as well as a brand owner yourself. What are limitations? How to navigate that?
Yeah, so for cosmetics or beauty products in general, first of all, from a market standpoint, from an e-commerce standpoint, there has been a massive boom in the D2C market for obvious reasons. Consumables in general, which obviously beauty products are going to be some of the highest LTV types of brands that you can actually build. You may not have a reason to buy earphones like every year, right? But I have my favorite hair wax, for example, and I literally bought like probably $600 worth of hair wax over the last 10 years because I buy it every 2 months, right? And that's hair wax, right? And like, that's one single hair wax, and it costs like $10 or something. So they have some of the longest LTV potential, and a lot of the big e-commerce guys are really getting into it because of that. And another complication, or actually another requirement of optimizing for beauty, is bundling. You want to be able to sell 5 at a time. You want to be able to bundle a lotion with a cream, with a serum. Now, that creates complications. So a little bit history about just liquid or cosmetics or cream type products is that years and years ago, some of the best couriers, they just wouldn't actually take any liquid products, partly because of airline restrictions around. I mean, if you fly on a plane, you can't take on like more than 100 milliliters on the plane itself as a passenger, right? And you have to put like larger items in the hold. So that's part of it as well. And previously, our couriers like Union Express, for their normal lines, they just wouldn't send any liquids at all because they didn't really know how to navigate it because they didn't want to get in trouble with the airline. So you actually had to use something like maybe e-packet or some kind of slower line that tries to bypass that. Now, more recently, they actually have updated. They introduced cosmetic lines, which we sometimes call liquid lines at ecom ops, and the first iteration of it was actually quite limiting. They wanted to stick under 100 milliliters. At one point, it was actually 100 milliliters for the whole package, but then they evolved that into 100 milliliters per bottle itself. So that actually started to enable a lot of beauty brands to start actually shipping from China. Now, if you use cosmetics at all, 100 milliliters is not that much. Like it works for maybe kind of a premium, like smaller size type of product, but it doesn't work for shampoo. No one wants 100 milliliters worth of shampoo, except for a sample, right? So, because of that market demand as well, there has been actually more nuance in terms of how these couriers think about the way that they actually are allowing or working with the airlines to have more flexibility in these type of liquids. So we'll use the United States as a example because the United States and their customs procedure is actually the most strict out of all countries. So we'll use this as kind of a baseline, and then we'll assume that everything else, every other country is either as strict or a little bit less strict. For the US, there is actually a consideration around there is everything that is possibly considered a cosmetic or a fluid potentially, you have to use what's called the cosmetic line, and then we call the liquid line at ecom ops. That means anything to do with pure liquids or toners, but also creams as well, and also gels, and also like maybe like foundation, for example, which is more of a powder. They do that because the U.S. Customs is very strict on categorizing what the goods are. You can't get away with saying that, hey, this is not really a liquid, so why don't we just call it a solid, right? So everything that is considered a cosmetic has to use that line in the first place. However, even with that, within that line, there are two types of restrictions. One is that if it's actually considered a pure liquid. So the obvious ones are going to be you're selling a toner, you're selling like an oil, essential oils, for example, right? Or a I mean just anything that's actually a fluid. Now, thankfully, they were able to open up their restrictions on that. Previously, it was 100 milliliters, and now it's 500 milliliters if it's a pure liquid. So even with that, that starts to open up a lot of possibility, right? That means, technically speaking, even for a pure liquid, you can actually ship a 500 milliliter bottle, which is probably a more normal bottle for something like a shampoo, for example, right? What it also opens up is additional bundling options too, which is very important for skincare. So, for example, if you're trying to meet 500 milliliters and you're selling a body lotion, for example, that is more liquid, well, if you make the packaging 160 milliliters, then you can actually pack three of those in one package and obviously save on that versus sending three packages, right? And that's a very, very important strategy in skincare. I mean, anyone in beauty or skincare consumables knows that you want to sell three at a time, five at a time, ideally, right? So you can sell 5 times 100 milliliters in one package as well. And that actually like really, really changes your economics versus shipping that separately. Now, the other nuance, which complicates things but makes things easier as well, is that there's a certain category of cosmetics that you have to use the same line. However, they don't actually have the same liquid restrictions. So, an easy way to describe it is anything that doesn't pour out easily when you like tilt it. So, for example, like a wax or a thicker kind of lotion, right? Certain types of thicker creams. Those things are required to ship via the cosmetic line. However, they don't have the 500 milliliter restriction. That still has a total package weight restriction that applies for any product. But in the US, for the ordinary lines, it's like 5 kilograms. So you can actually send 5 kilograms of a product to the US, even though it's a cosmetic, but if it's a cream. So that opens up then a lot more bundling options, right? Actually, the skincare brand that we're working with, like right now, we're shipping like up to 12 of a body scrub at a time to the US as a potential option. And they're 100 milliliters each. So that package is 1.2 kilograms worth of a cosmetic product. So you can see like how that opens up a lot more possibility in how you deal with that. And this is actually a very good example of the courier lines are going to also react to market needs as well. Now, we want to balance it with responsibility, right? The reason why there is no room for flammable products, well, it's flammable. That's why, right? For cosmetic, it's very, very different because the original restrictions were actually at the very start, it was more because of actually the terrorist attacks, 9/11 in the US. And probably rightfully so, airlines started getting a lot more strict on, kind of like just all the products on board. But for most liquids, they're actually not like an actual safety risk. It's just that airlines want to control how much you can actually send more because of potential bad actors. And because of that, couriers realizing that there is ever increasing demand for shipping cosmetic products from China to customers around the world, they've been able to kind of push and test new things and be able to evolve the restrictions, loosen the restrictions, understanding what the actual customers or what the e-commerce brands actually utilize. And I want to just leave as an insight here too as well. And we at Ecom Ops are always at the forefront of actually understanding what the changing needs are. So continue to tune in, by the way, if you're actually intrigued by what the restrictions are on if a product you have restrictions, because I will guarantee you they will change, mostly for the better, sometimes for the worse. But the logistics landscape and restrictions and what you cannot ship, should not ship is always changing as well. So we'll be able to keep in the loop on that. And if you have specific questions on any of that, please, ask us, and we'll be able to give you the best up to date advice on that.
Yeah, I think it's good to add you mentioned the 5 kilogram being the maximum, and most of the time it's for a lot of last mile it's maybe even lower. And just but the logic as well is very realistic actually, especially in Europe where I'm based in the Netherlands. Is the deliveries are done by bikes, a lot of them. So there is a limitation on sizes that fit in your bag to deliver it in the first place. So if you would have 5 parcels that are supersized, then you have 5 deliveries and you have to go back and you have to go pick up the new ones and go back and forth, back and forth. So size limitations, but also the efficiency of the delivery is based on the frequency of how many addresses they can pass and these parcels too. If it becomes heavier and bigger, you probably need a van to go around, which then also increases the price. So there is also obviously the limitations are also the shipping from China tends to be lighter weight products or orders to be shipped out because that's the most efficient way to ship out. Don't start shipping furniture. Obviously, all those larger size items in there. There are limitations on sizes. I think these are all available online. It depends actually on the country itself. If you have that question, also feel free to reach out to us. We see that the restrictions that I described, they're there, but there is also limitations sometimes per country. And the example was the US, but we see somebody sending beauty products to South Africa and it got held by customs for inspection, or Saudi Arabia. So when you open up to the whole world, there is a risk. And also these regulations change. It's not that the whole world has it listed online what these regulations are country by country. Sometimes it's also just trial and error. And we also really want to facilitate, like, if we're not sure, let's test it, because there is still things that are moving during the industry that are not always as black or white itself. Because when it's not really a dangerous product, should it be treated as one? That's always a little bit of that. But obviously, the countries are very strong on we want to protect our citizens, which I think is also a fair point, right? You don't want to import stuff that is dangerous for the population to start using on their skin or in their body itself. I think that makes sense, but it's harder for you to scale globally, but it's possible to test and then get that feedback from where is your parcel getting stuck, and then you educate yourself and okay, maybe I should just not send to that country because it's not the right time, and maybe let's try in a few months again or a year or so from here, or just monitor what is the regulation stating going forward, if that's a key country for you you would like to develop or grow into.
The other thing that I want to add about the weight restriction of 5 kilograms, which by the way differs from line to line and country to country, is that there is what you can send from China, and there's also a question of like what you probably should not send directly from China. The reality is that the only thing that makes China shipping parcel wise very efficient is because it utilizes air freight. And air freight is relatively more expensive, especially as it scales up in weight. We can confidently say that if you're selling a product that's a couple hundred kilograms, if you include all of the cost comparisons to like sea freight, your local fulfillment, that you're going to have a very, very good, potentially cheaper cost shipping from China. Now, if you're talking about something that's 5 kilograms, you can ship it from China, but because of how air freight scales, you should not be shipping air freight, whether it is freight or direct from parcel shipping. Furniture. Well, furniture may not be a good example because like that's just anything that is like, let's just say a 5 kilogram product, right? You should really be shipping that via sea, no matter what. The cost economics just do not make sense at all. I suppose if it's like a super expensive product and maybe you have enough room and margin to ship that, that is a possibility. But then if you're selling a very expensive product, then you probably have the cash flow to actually like optimize your supply chain. So you're shipping it to a local fulfillment center anyways. But anything that is less than that, like do not sell like a $50 product that's like 3 kilograms and the shipping is going to like be like, 30% of your entire gross revenue. You can make it work, right? But it just doesn't actually make sense. That being said, what does work is bundling, right? It's very different that if you sell a 5 kilogram product for $90, right? And you're paying like, tens of dollars on just the shipping. However, and this happens a lot in skincare, for example, is you sell a massive bundle of like, 10 different things plus free gifts, and it's like $300, $400 worth of products altogether, and then that adds to a couple of kilograms, right? That makes a lot of sense. All right, so there is some nuance there, but please do not think just because you can ship a 5 kilogram product that somehow it makes sense that you should be selling a 5 kilogram product directly from China. I also want to mention the country restrictions as well. So it's not as much restrictions. Technically, there's a way to ship parcels to I think every single country in the world. Not sure about Antarctica, but like maybe there's a couple of countries that you can't ship to. However, like virtually every single country in the world you can ship to. Actually, I actually just had a contact who is in the Maldives. And he was like, I have this great idea. Like we can flood the Maldives market with this like device because no one's selling it. And I was like, well, so like. I mean, we can ship to the Maldives, but it's going to be super expensive and it's going to take like maybe 2 months, right? So the point is the lines that we suggest, there are roughly, I think, 50 or 60 countries, depending on what specific line that you choose to use, that we deem and our courier deems to be very efficient to ship to. And the reason for that is that our couriers, or someone like Unexpress, for example, when they actually offer a line to a specific country, they have to make pretty significant investments to actually be able to deliver that country. They have to organize regular freight. They have to figure out a routing warehouse in the local country to make sure that it can actually be passed on to the last mile efficiently. So what we tell our clients is, why do you need to sell to 100 countries? Do you even have a market to 100 countries? Like, is someone from Antarctica even going to buy from you? Is someone from South Sudan going to buy a $30 product where like their average like income is like what, $1, $2 a day? I mean, those are specific examples, right? So don't feel the country limitations are somehow limiting your ability to a scale to this idea of global. Global doesn't mean to every single customer in the world. Global means how do you access the largest market possible that would actually buy your product, so you actually are profitable in that market. And that means that they have to have enough of an income to do so. And if there is an e-commerce market in any country, and by the way, like, maybe some countries that don't have that great market is going to evolve in the next decade into a great e-commerce market as well. I guarantee you that then, if that actually happens, then couriers are going to tackle that market, right? But just, don't feel like just because we don't have a great shipping option to a specific South Asian country, for example, means that you're somehow limiting yourself in terms of scaling. It probably literally means that no one is actually able to scale e-commerce in the same way in that market anyways.
But even though it might be the same country, because I had the question yesterday. So how? Because when it comes to the U.S., Hawaii is part of the U.S. Virgin Islands is part of the U.S. Alaska is part of the U.S. The military bases all across the world is considered U.S. territory. So even within that nuance, is shipping to these areas are not going to be the same as shipping to, let's say, mainland US. And the same applies to Spain, like Spanish islands, Canary Islands, and French. France has different islands as well. You have to just consider there are no stable lines. The volume is not big enough to reach these locations. Therefore, it has to go with a postal delivery because postal companies have an obligation by law to deliver to every household that is within the territory of the country. That's a law. So that means that it will have to be injected into something else that might be not as fast, not as efficient. Same for the Maldives, which you just mentioned. There is limitations to that. It's just something you need to know. So it can mean that you turn these areas off. If you can turn it off in Shopify not to sell to these regions, or just educate them in advance and say, look, they're used to it. Nobody in Antarctica is expecting a 5 to 8 day delivery. I don't think so, at least when it
It
when
might
it
be
comes.
5 to 8 weeks to Antarctica if it ever gets. But
Exactly.
yeah, it's a good point. So when we say, literally speaking, when we talk about these lines to the United States, we're actually talking about the 48 states, the 48 contiguous U.S. states, and the reason for that is because the routing warehouses that, for example, Unexpress uses, they're going to be based in the states, like the actual like contiguous states, and then they move freight there, and then they use USPS or something else to get to within the states. It does not make sense for the freight to get to New York and then go to Alaska and then go to Hawaii, right? So for those, let's just use those two states as an example. It actually makes more sense. It's more efficient to just use more of a postal service process, which is going to be a little bit slower, which is going to be a little bit more expensive. But to Simon's point, I've seen both strategies. One is just don't sell to Alaska and Hawaii. Don't sell to American bases. And trust me, that's not going to affect your sales that much. There's not that much demand there, right? Or sell to them, but then just set the expectations that, hey, if you're in Hawaii, it's going to take a week longer. For example, I mean, I suppose if you're selling swimsuits, maybe Hawaii is going to be like a top, a top market for it, right? But just make it clear to your customers that this is going to take a little bit longer. And honestly, so I'm all about setting up your clear customer expectations. We've seen many cases where we don't, like, I ran a brand before that actually ships to Hawaii, and I personally forgot to have messaging that it's going to take longer. And then we realized we've had like tens of Hawaii orders and no one complained. I was like, oh, interesting. And they all took like 2 weeks maybe, right? Like Simon also said, Hawaiians expect it. Like Hawaiians don't even expect fast shipping from a US warehouse. Alaskans don't expect fast shipping from a US warehouse even, right? So there is that aspect of everyone knows that Americans can be very, very focused on faster shipping speeds, but that's usually the 48 states. Whereas if you're actually living in a location that is like those American states or even in a different country or Spanish islands, they're going to know they're going to be slower, and they're going to have that just already personal expectation and have a lot more leeway around that.
Yeah, I mean one thing is good to add is also that besides maybe the island part, some countries, if you want to sell to the global, even one of these 60 countries like what I mentioned, some countries require also consumer ID numbers that you need to capture at your checkout. Most countries is like Brazil or Chile or Japan, Taiwan. Some countries just have that requirement that for import it needs to be imported on the consumer, and therefore it requires this kind of data. So if you start selling shipping globally and not knowing it, it will get stuck and then it will be a messing, it will be frustrating. Or if you use an agent, they will tell you, normally they should tell you at least, that we cannot ship this order because we're missing this number. You have to reach out to the consumer to be able to maybe ship out 1 or 2 days later, but it will definitely, you will win that time back. For the other scenario is it getting stuck for potentially weeks.
So actually, Brazil is a very good example of this. Is every Brazilian order, like you literally require an ID or a tax ID, or it's gonna get stuck, literally, right? And then I've spoken to clients before who are entering Brazil, and then we're like, okay, you need to collect the ID, and they're like, that's gonna kill conversions. Like, oh, I don't know. Like if I had to ask something like that to an American customer, they're just not gonna buy. Like I'm like, look, every Brazilian is 100% used to having to provide a tax ID at checkout. It's the same thing as providing an email to them, for example, or a phone number to them. And this is a nuance that everyone should consider is that every single country, every single market, not only do they have potentially their own restrictions, but maybe because of those restrictions as well and the requirements, the local customers are actually used to it. So don't think that, especially if you're, for example, like marketing only to Americans right now, and then you're entering new markets. Do not be limited by what you already know in a specific market and assuming that is the same in some other market. And it's just so different, right? There is a point to say that, hey, like if you're entering a new market, like don't worry about localization too much, right? I mean, don't worry too much about it until you actually test it. However, like once you see any traction in a specific market and you're scaling up, then you really do have to understand, hey, this is the local restrictions, the customs, and then how do you localize not just language, by the way, but stuff like collecting tax IDs and different payment methods for that market, but only for scale.
Yeah, we covered a lot about how you can actually ship out better and more effectively, more efficiently, but also what are the loopholes and gaps in the supply chain that might be frustrating as a seller, but the awareness, that's where it starts with. So you can actually educate and get your brand become a global brand, because there's a lot of nuance on what's possible and why some things work the way they do work. And they're working. And the expectation is not always that it has to be immediate delivery.
Yeah, and I think that maybe some viewers were hoping that we're going to give you a black and white list of exactly what to do and what not to do. And unfortunately, and maybe fortunately as well, is it depends. And it's always changing as well. And usually in your favor or in the customer's favor. Because, hey, look, we as ecom ops, our couriers, we all want to ship more and ship more different things. And we're constantly evolving, and the couriers are constantly evolving to how do you find that balance with making sure that everyone meets any local restrictions and safety responsibility, but then how do we find creative ways to ship more goods, ship different types of goods. So certainly this is something that is ever evolving, which please stay tuned to us as well, because we'll keep you updated on the evolving landscape as well.
So thank you so much for listening. We really take the time to actually try to share everything that we've learned in the past years. We think it's valuable. We hope and actually believe that it will change the industry. But we do need you as well. You as a listener or as a viewer, we do need your help to be able to spread the word. Please do share this episode and like it, and make sure that we become more visible with the message. We spend our time and efforts to get this years of experience out there. We believe in it. I hope you do as well, and really appreciate your support. See you on the next episode.